And maybe I was thinking, and unfortunately I didn't get all of the speech before and also of the first one, but to put like maybe a framework around what you just introduced, our mission at Vitra is shaping, or that we believe in environments that shape the way people think and feel, and we try to influence that through the power of good design. Of course, with the products, but we try to see it in a holistic environment. And this is what I also want to try to talk about to you today, because as a workplace consultant, what I worry mostly about, whether it is around the globe internationally or here in Finland, in Germany, or in Switzerland, it's what drives people. And I don't know I don't know the statistics in Finland, but in Germany I heard about the statistics that most men, so 70% of the heart strokes happen on Monday morning between 7 and 9 o'clock. So that's usually when you start after the weekend to go back to work. And I think this is something that we should worry about, and this is how I ended up in the field where I am. And what I worry about is like what really gets people through the door in the morning. So when they come to work, what is inside? So talking about culture, I'm going to focus a little bit more not just on the culture and the background and the differences in the world, but also like how culture is shaped in environments and how interior architecture can actually be a communicator in this as a strong enabler, to say. Where do I come from? This is actually the office I work in, as you said, in Switzerland. That's our headquarters. And I chose this picture not to talk about why I sit there, but I think it just expressed very strongly to me, I think it was some days before Easter, what the power of space can be. And I was there on my way actually to Zurich with my girlfriend, and I stopped by because I needed to pick something up in the office. And she had never been there. And we walked into the space, and I was continuing to talk, and I noticed that she wasn't with me anymore. So I turned around, and she was standing in this space, and I was like, "What's up?" And she said, "I'm not sure if I would go home if I would work here." I was like, okay, this is something that, and I hadn't explained anything or any expression about the place, or you know, and it's something that I think just the impact of the space worked for itself. And this is sometimes what we forget also in workplace design. We explain very much about the functionality and everything that we design in space, but there's much more that space does intentionally just by itself. So talking about culture, and I mean, we heard like already some expressions, and I think like it connects a little bit. That's one expression that I found, and this is very general, but if culture is the way of life, and especially the customs and beliefs of particular groups and people at a particular time, and I think the time is also very important here. So when we talk about culture, we need to see where we're at today, especially when we talk about workplaces, and when you see how the expression actually switched. So it's not just about the way of life, but it's actually the ideas and the ways of working that are typical inside an organization and that affect how the business and its employees behave. So I think in terms of workplace, really it is about the connection of transporting or enabling the culture of an organization to come to life. And space, nowadays, of course, technology, methodologies, everything can be a great transporter and enabler to bring that to life inside companies. What we're facing today is very much standards, and you've seen our office that unfortunately, luckily, is a little different. I think my girlfriend was reacting the way because she's living in a quite standardized office, to say. And I must say, ever since I've been also working here in Finland, I've seen some really good works. So I must say, like, so it's not as hesitating. But if you look around, that we're still very shaped, and this is also like going back to my profession, not just to the interior, but really to the architects. It's really the shaped environments that we live in are very standardized. And I don't want to go too deep into the office environments or like the buildings, but the same happens inside organizations. Like companies are shaped, just standardized, like they have like the hierarchy, they have the org chart, and this is what they put together. We do the same in schools. This is in Germany. I know we're starting to learn from the Nordic examples, but actually it's the same here. And I was talking to my mom last night, and she has been a teacher, and we were talking about the quality of spaces, and she was like, "You're right. When I was a teacher, this wasn't probably the most expressive, like inspiring environments, and this is the future of the people that we want to influence, that we want to inspire to go to a brighter future. If those are the spaces that they're going to, I actually doubt that this is what actually is going to move us." And if we look into the future, though, those things will probably change. So stepping ahead, maybe 10 years, maybe spaces or standards will not be anything we go into, but maybe they will just be virtual. Maybe it's not about organizations and how they're structured at all. Maybe it's about, like Fabian Fortmüller in New York is working on, building communities. And this is not about answering questions. This is really just building the framework that is individual, giving you answers depending on who you actually are. And the same might happen in schools. This is just one example that I took from Hamburg, where they're finally just trying. So they're building sort of a beta space where they're trying to learn differently and use the space as a third, to say, teacher in the environment to influence actually the kids. And what we also realize, and this is something that when we go into the companies, and what they're mostly struggling with is that, I mean, space can be influencer, but space usually influences what? And that's the people. And there's something in all of this process that is a very slow factor. And this is ourselves. And we heard this before, that nobody likes the change, so it takes us time to actually adapt to this. But if we look into spaces and what we actually do see, it's mostly what we visualize. So it's about the building, we see the structures, we see the technology, we see the products, we see the chairs, we see the tables, we see how people behave regarding coffee, and maybe we see hierarchy, we see how they deal with their work. Maybe you can visualize the work. So it stays very much on the surface. But if we want to think about what actually influences people, so how they experience space, we need to look deeper. And this is very basic, because if you look at what influences us, it's the values, it's the behaviors, it's different psychology aspects, it's maybe our background in terms of like education, and those are things you don't see. But you walk into a space, and this background actually influences how you experience space. When I was in March, it's a little bit bright in here. This was, I think, one of the most inspiring moments that I lately had. I went to Lapland, and I was standing in the middle of the night, in the middle of the woods, and I was waiting for this to appear, but it just doesn't come when you're waiting. So you need to get lucky. And the moment I was like freezing and like packed up camera and everything, this started to happen above me. And I was just standing there, and I couldn't express what was happening. And I think this goes very deep into how you actually experience things in terms of nature, what we've forgotten. And this is like very, very deep in our natural heritage. So what we're anchored, how we're anchored actually to biology, to the nature, and how this influences us. But it's not just the nature, I think. It's also something else. I don't know if you've ever noticed what happens when you walk into a church. This is actually not, well, it's the one from Stanford. And I took this picture while I was running around the campus, and I walked in there. And I remembered something happened. Because at the moment you walk in there, maybe it's the education, maybe it's also the culture, the religion that brings you to experience a place like this differently. But it's also the architecture, it's the lighting, it's coming together, how you actually perceive a space differently. And it's also the influence of art, of the history that you can perceive in a building like this. So when it comes to the human, I think it's very strongly that we're, on the one hand, as I said, influenced by the nature, as I said, but on the other hand, also what nurtures us is the influence of the people, which can be through art, which can be through like the connection, interaction, and how this comes together. This picture I took years ago, and actually in Hong Kong. And when you think of Hong Kong as a city that has been grown, I don't know, over the years, and this was something that I was finding in my pictures, because I remember when I was there, like breaking out of the city. It was something where I was standing in front of this wall together with my friend that I was visiting for quite a long time, and we were discussing how nature just comes back and like takes over wherever it is actually been growing from. And I think it's a good expression to understand how biophilia, and luckily this is happening, is coming back in the design, into like spaces, in the architecture, and is bringing that back to life. On the other hand, same journey. I took this picture from a little boy, and I think it expresses very much about what it means in terms of what we sometimes forget. We're in this moment, we were just talking about it earlier, online all the time. So we're connected with everyone through the world. But in terms of social interaction, it's actually much more. And sometimes we shouldn't forget about that. I mean, I've been living alone for a long time, traveling and living in different places. And I realize that sometimes when I come together with my family, that something else happens in those moments. So, and this is something that, I mean, we talk about the social interaction and the collaboration, communication in terms of companies, but it's really that something else can come out of it. And so it actually raises the productivity. And there's another fact that I wanted to share with you that I've lately noticed, and so I think everybody should be familiar with the product that I show here, but this is not what it's about. But it's something that a lot of people have told me and that we've worked with, and it was the aspect of security. So I tried to understand what security means in an environment, or what it means, how to bring that into architecture and how to connect that, and it's somehow also to connect with familiar items. So how design pieces, how environments can actually give you the real feeling of comfort because you're actually familiar with them. So to bring that together. In terms of culture, when we come to what it means, the way of life, and where I think it is the expression of our general beliefs, and how it influences the people. I've been trying to link that on the other way, like how does it come from the architecture? So linking that to space, I came across the work of Anastasia Sabinova, who's been working on this project. She's an artist. She's been living in Lapland, but on the Swedish part. And she's been working on this project, Genius Loci. And as an architect, of course, you're familiar, or I was familiar with the topic, but I think what she expressed very well in her works to bring what it means just in the fact in terms of design, what you find in the place, in terms of like architecture and items, and how to actually rebuild something out of that. So for me, it's not just to dig deep and understand what the spirit of the place is, but actually to transform it into something that actually brings back something new. And we've been working on this long before with Franz Riebenbauer. He's out of a communication agency, and I don't know if you're familiar with the term Heimat. It's a very German term that you can't translate, unfortunately, into English, but trying to express it in German, we would say it's not it's not a location, it's not a space, it's something that gives you identity, it's something that expresses a feeling. So Heimat for us is sort of a destination. So in order for this work that we did with them, we tried to understand how to relate that, and we called the project What the Fuck is Heimat? Because it was quite difficult for us to discover what this means. And I guess it's for everyone else to discover that in different ways. And through this project, we came together with Pietro Russo in Milan, who is a designer, and in his work. And in his space, he has this rock. So we asked him what this rock has to do in the middle of his studio. And he said, like, well, he's from Sicily, and he's been living in Milan for quite a long time, but he grew up down on the island. I don't know if you've ever been there. I've lived in Milan quite a long time. So I understand what his relation to his home was. And he said, like, this is basically the stone where, like, the rock where I used to play on when I was a child. So he brought that item actually as a route back to his studio, and that's where he sits when he needs answers, when he doesn't know how to connect to the outer world, when he doesn't know how to answer things, when he wants inspiration. So he tries to connect what his Heimat is back in Sicily. So I'm not saying like everybody of you should put a big rock in their place or in their studio. Oops, sorry. But I guess it's about finding what your sense of security is, what your sense of inspiration can be, and how to actually connect to that. And really bring that into, maybe your daily life, maybe into your work life, and how to connect that. I'm just going to leave you with this video because I think it's going to be quite self-expressing.
We like to take walks around the valley. It's the part of Girona where our parents were born. We go and gather the dirt around there. Because this is the dirt that we used to play in. Dirt appears in our cooking as a way to explain a feeling, to describe nostalgia or melancholy. We all have that aroma of moist earth in our memory. All of us. For any culture. That's why this ingredient is so magical.
I always wanted to have a dish that connects me with that memory. Of going back to a place that connects us all with our origin.
So yes, for me, the question is how to connect to this soil, to your DNA, and also with the projects that we do in order to understand what the ingredient is that we need to bring on the table that kind of creates this surprise in the projects. And this is quite a difficult journey, but I think it's worth to explore this and worth digging that deep, because this is how we connect and how we bring to life actually the culture from the origin. And of course, it's not just to look back and understanding, as I was saying, like understanding the spirit of the place, maybe what your earth or is like what the client's earth is, but how actually workplace can explore culture or also influence. And of course, when we talk in projects to our customers, usually it is they come from a certain place, but they also want to go somewhere else. So it's also something not just organizational, but also establishing maybe a new culture and building on something new. And for me, this is very strongly linked to the concept of what you find in urban design or requalification of spaces. Because of course you find something, not just the spirit, but you always find also some structure, some infrastructure, like everything that is already there. You find the people and you need to move them. So it's more really about how to actually activate what doesn't work anymore. So with the example, I don't know if you've ever been to New York to the High Line, but I think for me this is one of the greatest examples that kind of reconnects to the spirit of the place, but nevertheless brings in a complete new spirit and created a complete new item and a complete new culture in this area of New York, where people, of course, have recreational experiences. It's still the connection. What I think when you go through there is very surprising, that it can be a very individual place. It can be like a group place where you connect, and it's a journey just walking through there that activates you inside New York. Not that the city does that already. But I wanted to also reconnect a little bit to how the culture can actually influence that. And in our work, we see very strongly the demand, or like the stronger demand, for the companies to establish this kind of community. I've shown the canvas earlier, but it's also, and this is very, very much linked to, then again, the place, and this is the campus. Who hasn't been, we highly invite you to come, because I think this is a very inspirational place where you actually can feel the identity of Vitra. For me, working, as I said, in Switzerland, so at the headquarters, for me this still is a place where I go and I find my inspiration. I just was explaining that to some clients this week, where we go and get inspiration for our work. This is where we actually get it ourselves, and strongly linked to our identity. We see how companies do that, try to transport that on different levels. One of the big companies that ships everywhere, basically, I guess, based in Seattle, that's where they come from. What you see is they're headquartered where 40,000 people work, actually, from Amazon. And what they actually build is a connection to nature. It's actually expressing something where they wanted to give something back to the people, where they wanted to give them the freedom, the inspiration, a recreational area in order to establish their company or their identity and communicate with the people. It doesn't always have to be that large scale, but in order to build your identity, it can also be the kitchen table inside the company where everybody comes together for a daily lunch, or where people meet. And it also can be in workplace, for me, a very great example, where you don't express with your identity, that you don't have any hierarchy, but you kind of connect on one level, so everybody sits at the same table all day long. One example that we lately realized together is Alnatura. They're like a supermarket or like chain that. As you can see, very connected to biologic agriculture. They were one of the first ones to establish that. They have had quite a success, and they kind of are very strongly influenced by this work. As you can see also in the detail, also their warehouses, but this is their new office building that they just moved into, where you walk in and you can breathe nature. It's really the materials that you can see. It's like the walls are made of are like basically earth, recycled materials that they found locally. All is made of recycled or recyclable materials, woods, and everything. But they, as you can also see, it's quite an open building. For them, actually, the inspiration to think also the way they actually work. So really bring that culture of openness, of transparency that they have in their products into the space and have the people work like this. There is something else that would, like when you come from the product perspective and how the product can influence your culture or how the product is part of a company's culture, how to experience that. And I think Michele De Lucchi did quite find a well expression for what is the challenge of the future. And also on a psychological, social level, he did this installation during the Salone 2014, which was basically about bringing people into movement. So really having people the experience of the full organization. So, and I've noticed this myself, that when I walk into my office space, I don't know what's happening at the end of the floor. I don't know if, you know, when you walk through offices, usually it doesn't become visible. So it's really about the connection and experiencing what people do. What is the outcome? What do companies work on? And this is a challenge nowadays because it's maybe shifting, like the business model is shifting. So companies like here, like RGA, put their products at the center of the space. So really the experience of what they do, everybody connects. This is where you have the coffee. This is where you enter. You see what the company is actually working on. Companies that don't have feasible products, Airbnb, brought their listings into the office space. So they reconnect with what they actually do by recreating environments that they rent out in the world and having the people actually experience them in their office space. And a company that I think maximized the outcome was G-Star, that we did in the Netherlands. And G-Star is known for their denim, for like a very industrial design, which they also transport in their stores, as you can see. So you get a feeling of what they want to stand for. And for them, the idea of the project, when they started, was this. And I don't know if you've ever seen how airplanes are built. So this is Boeing, but Airbus is quite the same. And it's basically everyone is working on the same product at the same time. So all the engineering teams and everyone is working physically on the same product. So the product should be in the center, and this was their idea. They came through the link through to the industrial design across Jean Prouvé and his heritage and his work, who always worked with the industrial items, and this is how we translated actually their product into the product that we can see today or that you can experience inside the office space. The office space by Rem Koolhaas is still inspired by the airplane. So it's a hangar. It's quite a neat place. Whoever wants to go, connect with us. We try to get people in there in Amsterdam. I think it's very worth it. As you can see, the product became. Of course, they're not all working on jeans while they sit in the office space, but nevertheless, the product became the translation into the furniture, and you can feel. And maybe if you look at the space like this, you wouldn't know that directly, but when you go in there, you really have the feeling that it's part of the culture of G-Star with this kind of design. How to build a culture to foster innovation? I mean, I said it before, like a lot of companies that we're seeing are challenging their business models. So they need to reinvent, they need to be creative, they need to be fast. And Gareth Luden said from Apple once that when you ask the people when they have their most creative ideas, you get lots of different answers. Generally, it's not when they're sitting at their desk. It's usually linked to physical movement. I would go further. It's also linked to social interaction. And when you think about this and you take it to a different size, this is what they did with their new headquarters, the Donut. And it was actually quite funny when I walked into that space in December for the first time. And I came in there and I asked, why are all these people running around here? Like you come into that and this circular rate, like the diameter is 1.6 kilometers. So you move quite a lot when you're in there. And the answer was the people are meeting. So they don't go to meeting spaces, but by walking inside this, like actually the size helps them to connect on a different level. So it's really like you're on a highway when you go into the radius in there and there's like people running around. A different example of like how you can establish or bring that kind of innovative culture into an organization is Adidas at the Creators Farm, where they're really doing a great job. And I have a short clip for you that gives you a little bit of an insight.
We first described the Brooklyn Farm as an open source creative hub.
It's not about titles or roles. You don't have to be a designer. You can be an athlete, you can be a kid from Brooklyn, you can be a chef, because we can learn from everyone.
It's about bringing creators together and having a space for us to exchange ideas.
Spending time with creatives that are outside of where you personally might come from to look at different ways we can do things.
It's really about driving a sort of behavioral change, cultural change through experience.
The Brooklyn Farm is a creation center. It allows every one of our creatives to be free in your curiosity. It allows us to have the curiosity in what is possible. Now, what you do with this and how you build on it, that's what we're here to see.
So driving cultural change through experience. And I think what can you experience better than spaces? So let them be part of this cultural change and let them influence. What this means for us, and coming back to space when it comes to innovation, and this is from the Harvard Business Review. I don't know if you're familiar with the Allen curve, which they proved in the 70s that the further people are disconnected physically, the less they interact. And you might come to the conclusion that nowadays that we are connected through like all email, phone, Slack, I don't know what kind of items or tools you're using, it's still happening. So the further we move away, the less we connect with the people. So we need physical interaction, and that's why those companies believe in this, and that's why they bring the people together. The success stories, and I guess you can feel that nowadays also with all of the startups, you can see with the example of Apple, where they told me actually it was not in the garage, but it was in the bedroom of the parents, where they actually started. But Google and everyone else was the same. And it's about bringing people together in like physical spaces, having all of their tools on their hands, and actually get things done. And really not run around and get lost in writing emails, but really focus on the thing that you're doing. Similar to what Adidas is doing, bringing all those people in one space. So we need different spaces for this. And I brought you one example that we did in Zurich for PwC. That's not a regular PwC office. They call it an experience center, and actually brings to life a complete different work. Because here it's really about fast, agile methods, implementing, design thinking, Scrum, and it's not the space that actually influences it, but the work actually influences the space. So it's a super flexible, as you can see, with curtains, with the like movable furniture that actually supports just the way the people work. So they recreate their space. And maybe to share that, this was one experience that I had at Stanford where the Hasso-Plattner Institute, where they started IDEO and design thinking backwards. And they basically work in this field. So they don't implement fixed structures where the people come in and they start designing or creating, to say. And when I came into this space, I asked them how often it happens that people do something in the environment that they have never seen before. And I mean, I said it before, like we live in structures, we live in standards, and I guess we're all using chairs in the way, you know, you're all sitting in the way properly. Maybe at home you wouldn't. Maybe at home you would turn around the chair, or maybe you would sit down on the floor. In those environments, you usually don't do that. And they told me that it happens almost every time that they see something that people do with space that they haven't experienced before. So there is some freedom in us to actually adapt space to ourselves. And this is also important, I think, that we leave that kind of bit to the people that we design spaces for to actually make it themselves. It all sounds complex, and it quite is. I wanted to give you 3 key messages that I think are important, or for me at least are important, and for us in the way we work, that we don't believe in standards. Standards remain standards, and they will remain standards. So try always to think outside of the box. Ultra-modern can be good, doesn't necessarily have to. Always look where your clients, your companies come from, and try to reconnect that into a future. And there's always enough or like constraints and restrictions that we have to face, you know that. Let's not start with them. And this is always like trying to get that into the people's heads. Let's not start with them. They will come. They will always like cut and cut and cut ideas and everything, but let's not start with them. And just with Nick Foster from Google X, when he was still at Google X back then, the real skill of creating compelling and engaging view of the future lies not in designing the gloss, but in seeing beyond the gloss to the truth behind it. So in that sense, let's try to shape the truth and go out there and shape some new work cultures for the future. Thanks.